Get ready to roll. So, what is it, everybody? I wanted to bring you guys some type of video. My Wi-Fi has been so bad, I actually had got my first ban on Overwatch because of being disconnected from matches early. So we're breaking this video down into two parts, and these are going to be these little quick tips when it comes to each category. So when it comes to each class. So the quick tips, we're going to have one tip for each champion. You know, you've seen these YouTube videos, but this is from me being on the low end. Like, if you are a low rank player, this is something that will help you. Maybe you can use these tips to see something that's going wrong and boost yourself. Maybe if you're a high level player, you can see, okay, this is where low tier players are going wrong. So we are going to cover the tanks and the supports for the first video, and then I'm going to check my Wi-Fi. I only get about 20 minutes. So let's start with Ana. The first thing to note on Ana, and this is critical right here, is that you want to use your sleep dart on whatever the highest priority threat is. Now this can be a preemptive or a reactive action. So what do I mean by this? So your sleep dart, you know, obviously it requires aim to deal with her, but a preemptive or a reactive, well, what's the difference on that? So as an example, a Genji ult. If you know the Genji has his ult, your best bet is going to try and do it as a reactive measure to knock him out of it. Whereas in a situation like Winston's ult, you're not necessarily going to be using the sleep dart to knock him out of it, so you want to use it preemptively before he can ult to burn him down so he doesn't get it. You know, another key example would be Lucio. Anytime an ult is very powerful and hard to stop once they can get it out. Another great example is Sombra, because Sombra is going to negate on a sleep dart anyways. So it's always important to note that something that's very hard to stop once it's out, you want to use that as a reaction. If they get it off after the fact, for example, Pharah kind of straddles the line there. You can sort of get rid of her ult while she's in it, or you can get rid of her ult before she can get in it. It's a matter of the timing on that situation. It's how well is your sleep dart best used. You know, for example, like I said, using it on a Sombra before she uses her ult may be enough for your team to turn around, stop, shoot her. Same for a Winston when they're about to use theirs. For other ults that people don't think are as impressive, such as Widows, you know, even Brigette's, I would disagree on that. I would say if you can use that and eliminate that from the situation, it's better, because you're not knocking a Widowmaker. Correct me. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. You can't knock a Widowmaker out of her ult. Once she activates, you know, like the team gets that bonus. So it's not necessarily a precaution at that point. You just want to try and get her down before the ult comes out. That's the difference on knowing how to use her sleep dart. With Baptiste, this is a fairly simple one. You have your immortality field that prevents anyone inside of it from dying, as long as they're allies, obviously. The key here to note is that you want to make sure that you are not using it too early. So don't use it at the beginning of a fight when everyone is full health to buy them time, because it has a long cooldown and it gets destroyed very easily. Yeah, see this? Yeah. This right here would not be the way to use it. And I wanted to put that up there for a reason. How you want to use this is that when a target gets below half health, and that's critical, when a target reaches half health, then you want to deploy the field so that you can then get in and use your regenerative bursts and your healing grenades as an effective way to get a target back up to full health. And using that immortality field just sort of slow down the rate at which they die, so they don't instantly die before you can get your heals on them, especially if, for example, you're reloading and you can just activate your regenerative burst. Brigitte kind of straddles the line between tank and support, and it's important to know why she does that. She does have a shield, she does have a stun. The key to knowing how to use her properly is, first off, you don't want to be using your repair pack as a way to give armor. The armor that she gives with the repair pack is weak. It's better used as a heal. And even though she can only heal one person at a time, the heal that she gives is nice, and it's fast enough where it can save somebody that's very low. So a good technique to use is if you want to play Brigitte as a support-based character, you want to use your shield bash to potentially get in front of another ally that's taking damage, and block them while you're waiting on the cooldown for the repair pack to go down. Do a quick spin to give them the repair pack. If you're trying to play her as more of a tank, then how you want to use her heal is going to be different. You might want to use your whip shot and your shield bash and your whip shot as a good 1-2. So shield bash to stun them, and use your flail to knock them away, potentially into another tank or a flank or somebody that's flanking and pushing behind them, and focusing more on using those heal packs to top people off rather than to try and chunk them out if you're playing more aggressive. D.Va is the first of the tanks that we're going to cover, and an important thing to note is her defense matrix. I don't have any video, there's no little video to show you, but the important thing to note with the defense matrix is that it is on a rechargeable cooldown timer on the side of your screen. I'm holding my hands here to show you, where you're going to find it. It's going to be on the side of your screen, and it's very important that when you use it, you are realizing that you're using it mostly to block bigger, chunkier damage that your primary weapon can avoid, or your primary suit can take. Now I'm not talking about things like a Widow or a Hanzo shooting you, but I'm talking about, don't bring up your defense matrix to block Orisa primary fire. What you want to be using it is to block other abilities that have cooldowns on them. For example, Reinhardt's Fire Swing. You can use it to block certain Doomfist abilities, obviously other D.Va's rockets. Bastion is always a case where you want to, kind of avoid him, but you get what I'm saying. Soldier's rockets, because of the cooldown that they have, is another great example. And even things that you wouldn't expect otherwise, like knockbacks as well. McCree's flashbang, I believe you can still block that. They might have changed that, but that's an important issue when it comes to D.Va, is making sure you're limiting your use on that. The next thing we're going to talk about is Lucio, and Lucio is a great character to explore when it comes to knowing when to switch between his two songs. Generally, this is another thing that's important to note. Your slower tanks that don't possess a lot of mobility, for example, Reinhardt's, Roadhog's, Zarya's. And I would say Orisa, if you want to pick 4, kind of come close to splitting the group in half. Lucio is great for using his speed boost to help move these tanks around. It's important to note what tank you're pocketing, what you really need to focus on. If you're running 2 of those tanks, you want to primarily use your speed boost, wait for them to get low, begin using their shielding to defend themselves, then switch to your heal. And your amp it up should also only be used depending on what tanks you have. For example, if you're going with dive comps like Divas, Winstons, Wrecking Balls, you want to make sure that when you are actually healing them, that you're healing them with the amp it up, whereas when you are giving a speed boost, you're using it not with the amp it up with, say, the tankier one like the Rhine or the Zarya. Next we're going to cover is Mercy, and Mercy, there's a simple little trick right here. Do not resurrect a teammate right out in the open. Now there's 2 reasons for this. 1, if you die, you've now wasted 2 deaths on 1 person, which puts your team at an even further disadvantage. Think about it. Most fights in Overwatch, and fights in Paladins, and any other shooter in that game, in this genre, come down to the first team to get a pick is going to win the fight under most circumstances. Mercies that use their Guardian Angel and they try and fly out and resurrect, and then they get shot out in the open. Now they're putting their team at a 2-man disadvantage until both characters respawn, one of which is a healer that also provides a solid damage amp. So it's important to note how you're going to be using this effectively. Also, this is a new mic, so if it's kind of like loud, my apologies. Make sure that when you're resurrecting a target that there is a shield in front. Another important reason why you don't resurrect them right out in the open is because of the fact that maybe they're not shooting you, they're shooting the target that they want dead. For example, if this Reinhardt would not go down and you resurrect him out in the open, Sombra comes, sneaks in with an EMP, he is vulnerable and he's going to get killed again, which now wasted a 30-second ability, and a very powerful one at that, especially if you're prioritizing a tank over somebody else. Moira is an interesting character for me. One trick that I have on Moira that I like to talk about is managing your biotic orb with your biotic grasp. So for example, if you are launching a healing orb, primarily you should be focusing on using your damage. If you're launching a damage orb, you should be focusing on healing for that moment. For the next 2 to 3 seconds, you should be focusing on using the opposite of the orb that you have. The orb bounces around and heals and damages on its own. Let it do its work for you. If you have a team that's very low on health, obviously you should be focusing on, put out a healing orb and heal up. But remember that in order for you to heal, you need to deal damage. So you need to make sure that you're carefully maintaining that balance. Now, while that may be Moira in a nutshell, it's important to note, and I feel I should mention this, let your orb do its job. If you have one orb out there, your biotic grasp, you should be doing the other. Because if you're healing with the orb and your team is not like instantly dying in your face, then you can be using your biotic grasp as a way to help chip down the enemy team. Orisa is a very popular tank in the meta right now, and one thing that I want to mention that I think is pretty much critical is you should not really be using your fortify ability. I'm mentioning this because a lot of people don't talk about this when they mention one trick or one tip for each champion. You can time your fortify at the last second to prevent certain abilities. For example, it's incredibly effective to let the Reinhardt begin his charge before activating Orisa's fortify. The reason is because it forces his ability to go on cooldown. At the same time, you are going to be able to get the most out of your ability. There are going to be situations where you're going to be forced to baiting it out. For example, in order to reduce damage so a healer can come in with a heal. But remember, you do have your protective barrier as a mean to protect yourself as well. Your fortify should be used as a counter ability to force out other longer cooldown abilities, such as an Ana Sleep Dart or a Reinhardt's Charge. Speaking of which, Reinhardt! Speaking of his charge, it's important to note with Reinhardt that your charge is your most unpredictable and unreliable asset. Your charge, let's show you this, is incredibly effective if you get to use it. It's an insta-kill on almost all non-tank characters in the game, and it allows you to kind of bulldoze in and mishmash the team. Also, there's two important things to note on the charge. One, the charge is very hard to control, and if you miss your charge, you've put yourself in an unwinnable situation. 1v6. Yeah, you're not winning that as a slow Reinhardt that can only attack at close range. This brings me to my second point. If you are charging in like that, remember that your team is not going to be able to keep up with you, and that your team is going to be now put at a disadvantage should you die. If you can get your pick and sort of create a trade, it can be great, depending on who you're trading with. For example, if you take out the team's only healer, or you take out a Hanzo that is giving your team trouble from the back, or somebody like a soldier who's running around, can be hard for certain characters to lock on. Maybe a Tracer or a Genji just accidentally comes in your way when you're freight training through with the charge. That's an annoying character taken out of the mix. For Roadhog, the big trick that I have up my sleeve is remember not to ult when you're low health unless you know you can win. For example, a great solution, a great idea that I have with Roadhog is to make sure that when you are bringing out whole hog, that you know that within 1 or 2 seconds your take a breather is going to come back. That is an important thing to note. I see a lot of Roadhogs that ult with either no health, with no support and their breather is on cooldown, or they just simply ult with reckless abandon in a situation, trying to think, I can get damage. The recoil on it's very hard to get. If you're ulting with him at low health, you want to make sure that as soon as you come out of your ult, or if you get knocked out of your ult early, you have that heal to fall back on. Coming down to Winston as we round out the last 4 for this video. Winston, I think the most important thing to note with him is that his ult is the strongest part of his kit. His weapon does good damage, but it's a kind of a guessing game if you're going to hit it or not. His movement ability is solid and does a decent amount of damage, and his defensive matrix and his barrier projector is it's a good addition. It's not the best shield, it's not the worst shield. His ult is his primary ability. When you're playing Winston, you want to be playing him towards getting that ult so that you can get your big health bonus and you can get in there and brawl and melee. It's also important to note that when you do that, you still want to play as a team player. You're not just running in with reckless abandon like a Reinhardt misusing his charge. With Wrecking Ball, one trick that I think people forget is how his adaptive shield works. The amount of shielding increases with more enemies nearby. If you know your plan is going to be to roll into a group of enemies and unload to get the maximum benefit out of your shield, pop your shield early before it begins taking damage. Then roll in so that the shield instantly bubbles up, so to speak, and poofs out to its size. For example, a good 1-2 combo on him is to activate his adaptive shield, roll into a group, drop the minefield, and let it do its magic. Enemies have to decide between dealing with a Wrecking Ball with a large adaptive shield that's shooting at you in the face, or trying to avoid the minefield. This becomes a very effective strategy. If you were to pop your adaptive shield before you were to roll into the enemy group, they could potentially be getting some free damage on you. Especially when you roll, again, you're going to be going too fast for most of your team to catch. Zarya, probably the simplest tip in the world I have, is remembering that she requires a lot of communication. So, she has her 2 barriers, her particle barrier and her projected barrier, and they increase the damage of her cannon. So managing how those barriers and the damage that you have is critical. When you play Zarya, you always want to have a support with you, pocketing you, keeping you at a certain health state at all times. Do not play Zarya unless you have a support pocketing you. And last but not least, we have Zenyatta. Zenyatta is kind of that flex character between solid heals and solid DPS. The key that I think a lot of people forget with Zenyatta is how his orbs work. They're not a fire and forget thing. You have to have line of sight with them. So when you're choosing a target for your Orb of Discord, you want to choose a target that you know is going to be in your line of sight. And I'm not talking about a Widowmaker. I'm not talking about a Hanzo, a character that can potentially 1 or 2 shot you because they have that line of sight. I'm talking about a character that doesn't necessarily have the mobility to get out of line of sight quickly. With your Orb of Harmony, you want to have a similar situation. You want to keep it, but you need to time it differently. So you obviously want a character in line of sight that you're going to be able to keep healed very well, but the focus should be on a character that is above 50% of your health, that your Orb of Harmony is more topping off. As he's more of an off healer, you want to make sure that you're focusing more on keeping certain characters topped off, such as DPSs, rather than tanks who you'll struggle healing. Anyways, this is the video for the tanks and supports. I will be covering DPS in another video later on. Hope you enjoy.